My name is Claire Miller. I'm 30 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been living in London, 3,000 miles away from the chaos of my family in San Diego. I built a life here, a quiet, hardworking life as a UX designer. I thought I had finally escaped the role of being the family's personal ATM and crisis manager. But like an idiot, I actually thought this Christmas might be different. The trap was set at 3:00 a.m. London time. My phone screamed on the nightstand, and when I answered, there was my mother, Evelyn, sobbing on FaceTime. Her face was a mess of tears and desperation. "Claire, honey, we never see you anymore," she wailed. "The kids keep asking for their Auntie Claire. Your father's health isn't what it used to be. Please, just this once, come home for a real family Christmas." I felt that familiar tug of guilt, a rope tied around my ribs that she'd been pulling since I was a teenager. Against every logical instinct I had, I caved. I spent nearly $3,000 on a last-minute multi-city flight, 10 hours on a cramped overnight plane, 2 layovers, a dead phone battery, and a back that felt like it was being stabbed with hot needles. I landed in San Diego smelling like stale airplane coffee and exhaustion, but I still had a suitcase full of expensive gifts for my brother Jason's kids. I rang their doorbell, my heart pounding with a pathetic, childlike hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd hug me. Maybe she'd say she was proud of me. The door flew open, but there was no hug, no "how was your flight?" or "we missed you." My mother stood there, her eyes skipping right past my tired face to land on my suitcase. She checked her watch and spoke as if she were giving orders to a hired maid. "Oh, good, you're finally here. You'll babysit Jason's kids for the week. We're heading out on our family cruise tomorrow morning. Your itinerary is on the counter." I stood frozen. Before I could even breathe, my brother Jason stepped into the doorway wearing expensive sunglasses and a smirk. He had his duffel bag over his shoulder, and his kids, Liam and Chloe, were literally hanging off his arms. He looked at me and laughed. "Hey guys, don't wipe your snot on Aunt Claire. She's jet-lagged and probably cranky." They all laughed, my parents, my brother, even the kids. I stood there on the porch, a 30-year-old woman who had just spent her savings and 10 hours in the air to be here, and I was nothing more than a punchline. I was the free labor. The extra person who wasn't invited to the cruise but was expected to keep the house running while they enjoyed the vacation I was probably indirectly paying for. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. In that moment, something in me simply clicked off. It was like a thermal fuse blowing out. I smiled at my mother, a cold, sharp smile she didn't recognize, set my suitcase down in the entryway and looked her right in the eye. "I hope you kept the receipts for those cruise tickets, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Because you're going to need that money to find a new place to live by Monday." The laughter stopped instantly. The color drained from Jason's face. My mother started whispering, "No, no, no way," over and over again. They thought I was the same Claire who would just sigh and take the kids to the park. They had no idea that I hadn't just come home with a suitcase of gifts. I had come home with 3 years of financial receipts, a legal partition order, and the power to dismantle the lie they had been living on my dime. Stay with me until the end, and I'll tell you exactly how one ungrateful daughter ruined her family's perfect holiday and took her entire life back in the process. Because to understand why that one sentence froze the room, you have to know what these people had been doing to me while I was safe across the ocean. The silence in that entryway was thick enough to choke on. My father, Gary, finally shuffled out of the living room, clutching a beer and looking confused. "What are you talking about, Claire? What do you mean a new place to live?" I didn't answer him right away. I walked past them, my boots clicking sharply on the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish 2 years ago. I walked into the kitchen and saw the cruise brochure on the island. It was a VIP family package. The cost for 5 people must have been astronomical. "You see this trip?" I asked, pointing at the glossy paper. "This trip represents exactly why I'm done. Mom, 2 weeks ago you told me the property taxes were overdue and you couldn't afford groceries. You cried on the phone until I wired you $1,500. And yet here is a $5,000 cruise itinerary. That was a gift from Jason," my mother stammered, her voice rising in pitch. I looked at Jason, my brother who lived in the guest wing of this house and hadn't held a steady job since the late 2010s. I pulled my laptop out of my bag, flipped it open, and logged into our shared emergency account, the one I had funded for my parents' medical needs. "Funny," I said, turning the screen so they could all see, "because the deposit for this cruise was paid from this account. My medical fund, the money I sent for Dad's supposed heart specialist appointment, was used to book a balcony suite on the Carnival Spirit." My father's face went from pale to a deep mottled purple. "That's family money, Claire. You can't track it like a spy. We raised you. We put clothes on your back, and I put this roof over your head," I shot back, my voice gaining strength. Let's talk about that roof, Gary, because you guys conveniently forgot to mention something when you begged me to co-sign the refinance 3 years ago. I pulled up a PDF of the deed. Under the ownership section, it didn't just say Gary and Evelyn Miller. It said Claire Miller, co-owner. Because my credit was the only reason they weren't homeless years ago, the bank had required me to be on the title. My parents had told me it was just paperwork. They didn't tell me that by being a co-owner, I was legally entitled to force a sale if the other parties were defaulting, which they were. I got a notification from the lender in London, I said. You haven't made a full mortgage payment in 6 months. You've been paying just enough to stop a foreclosure notice, while spending the rest on brunch, Jason's business ideas, and this cruise. You're $60,000 in the hole, and because my name is on this loan, you're dragging my credit into the dirt with you. We were going to catch up, my mom wailed. We just needed a break, Claire. Life has been so hard. Life is hard for everyone, Mom, but most people don't use their daughter as a personal piggy bank while mocking her for being cranky when she flies halfway around the world to see them. I looked at the group of them, they looked like strangers. Not a single one of them had asked if I was okay, if I was hungry, or if I wanted to sit down. They just saw a problem that needed to be managed so they could get to the cruise terminal on time. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I've already contacted a partition attorney here in San Diego. Since I've provided 90% of the equity for this home through direct transfers and mortgage subsidies, I am filing to force the sale of this property. The bank has already flagged the account for suspicious activity regarding the medical fund usage. Jason stepped toward me, his fists clenched. You can't do that. Where are my kids supposed to go? You're going to make your own nieces and nephews homeless for Christmas. No, Jason, I said, meeting his gaze. You're making them homeless by refusing to work while your sister pays your bills. I'm just stopping the cycle. You have 48 hours to figure out where you're staying because I've already canceled the credit card on file for this cruise. There is no boat, there is no vacation, there is only the reality you've been running from. My mother sank into a kitchen chair, the cruise brochure fluttering to the floor. No, Claire, you're joking, you wouldn't do this to us. Watch me, I said. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock over the stove, a clock I had bought for them 2 Christmases ago. My father stared at the blank space on the wall where the truck used to be parked outside, while Jason looked like he wanted to scream but couldn't find the air. You canceled the cruise? Jason finally whispered, his voice cracking. The kids. They've been talking about the water slides for months. You're going to break their hearts over a bank statement? I'm not the one who broke their hearts, Jason, I said, leaning against the counter I had paid to install. You are. You let them believe in a fantasy built on stolen money. I just turned the lights on. If you cared about their happiness, you would have used that $12,000 to pay the mortgage and get a job instead of buying a VIP drink package. My mother looked up, her eyes red and streaming. Claire, please, we're your parents, we're old, you have that fancy job in London, you make so much. What is this money to you? It's nothing, but to us it's everything. It's not nothing, Mom, it's my time. It's the hours I spend staring at a screen while it's raining outside in London. It's the stress that keeps me up at night. And most importantly, it's the trust I had in you. You didn't just take my money, you took my peace of mind. You made me feel like a bad daughter every time I didn't send an extra $500 while you were sitting on a secret. I reached back into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I had spent weeks preparing this with my lawyer before I ever stepped on that plane. I slid a single document across the granite. What's this? My father asked, his hand trembling as he reached for it. It's an offer, I said. Since I am a co-owner, I have the right to buy out your shares or force the sale. This is a voluntary surrender of the deed. If you sign this, I will take over the mortgage entirely. I will clear the debt, and I will allow you to stay here for exactly 6 months rent-free, while you find a senior living apartment that you can actually afford on your Social Security. Jason, however, has to be out by the end of the week. Jason let out a harsh laugh. You're kicking me out with 2 kids? You're 34, Jason. It's time you learned what a rent payment looks like. I'm done subsidizing your lifestyle while you treat me like a servant. My father flipped through the pages, his face darkening. And if we don't sign, then the partition lawsuit moves forward on Monday morning, I said, my voice as cold as the Pacific. The house goes to a public auction. The bank takes their cut first, the lawyers take theirs, and whatever pennies are left will be split 3 ways. You'll be out in 30 days with nothing but the clothes on your back, and I'll still file a report for the fraudulent use of the medical fund. The room felt like it was shrinking. For years, they had used guilt as a weapon, knowing I would always cave because I wanted a family. They had weaponized my love to build a cage of debt around me. But they had forgotten one thing: when you push someone too far, you don't just break them, you change them. We need time to think, my mother pleaded. You had 3 years to think, I replied, checking my watch. It's 6:00 p.m. I'm going to a hotel. You have until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow to decide if you want a graceful exit or a legal war. If that paper isn't signed by the time I come back to get my gifts, I'm calling the realtor. I picked up my suitcase. It felt lighter now, even though it was still full. I walked out the front door, the same door I had entered with hope just an hour before. As I stood on the driveway waiting for my Uber, I looked at the house. It was a beautiful California bungalow draped in expensive LED lights that I had paid for. It looked like the picture of a perfect American family, but inside it was hollow. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one to fill it up with my own blood and sweat. I got into the car and didn't look back. That night in my quiet hotel room overlooking the bay, I didn't cry. I ordered a glass of wine, sat on the balcony, and watched the waves. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't wondering if my parents were okay. I was wondering if I was okay, and the answer, surprisingly, was yes. The next morning, San Diego was bathed in that perfect golden California sunshine that usually makes everything feel possible. But as I drove back to the house, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I wasn't Claire, the daughter who could be manipulated with a few tears. I was Claire Miller, the woman who had finally audited her own life and found it bankrupt. When I walked through the front door at exactly 9:00 a.m., the house was eerily quiet. The Christmas lights were turned off. The smell of expensive coffee was gone, replaced by the heavy, stale air of a long night spent in hushed, angry arguments. My parents and Jason were sitting at the dining room table. They looked like they had aged 10 years overnight. The manila envelope sat in the center of the table, the edges slightly crinkled. Well, I asked, standing at the head of the table. I didn't sit down. I didn't want to get comfortable in a place that had become a predatory trap. My father pushed the papers toward me. They were signed. His signature was shaky, a jagged line of ink that signaled the end of his reign as the patriarch of a house he couldn't afford. You got what you wanted, he said, his voice a raspy whisper. You've officially stripped your parents of their dignity. I hope your bank account feels as full as this house feels empty now. My bank account isn't the point, Dad, I said, picking up the documents and checking the signatures. This was never about the money. It was about the fact that you stopped seeing me as a daughter and started seeing me as a transaction. Dignity isn't something I took from you, it's something you traded away for cruises and convenience. My mother wouldn't even look at me. She was staring at a photo on the sideboard, a picture of me at 10 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth. We did love you, Claire, she whispered. We got used to you being the strong one. We forgot that being strong has a cost. The cost was $84,000, Mom, and 10 years of my life, I replied. I turned to Jason, who was staring at his phone, probably trying to figure out which friend's couch he could crash on. The locks are being changed on Monday, Jason. Your things need to be packed by Sunday night. I've already arranged for a moving pod to be dropped in the driveway. Anything left in the guest wing after that goes to the curb. Jason finally looked up, his eyes burning with a childish, impotent rage. You're a real piece of work, Claire. I hope you enjoy your tiny flat in London. I hope you're happy being all alone with your spreadsheets while we're actually out here living. I am living, Jason, I said. I'm living a life where I don't have to lie to the people I love. You should try it sometime. It's remarkably freeing. I walked into the living room and grabbed my suitcase full of gifts, the toys for Liam and Chloe. I wasn't going to leave them here for Jason to return for cash. I walked out to the driveway where the neighborhood kids were playing in the sun. I saw Liam and Chloe sitting on the curb looking confused. They knew the cruise was canceled. They knew something was wrong. I knelt down and handed them the gifts directly. Auntie Claire has to go back to work, I told them, kissing their foreheads. But I want you to have these, and I want you to know that I love you very much. Are you coming back for Christmas dinner? Chloe asked, her bottom lip trembling. Not this year, sweetie, I said, but I'll be watching out for you, I promise. I got back into my Uber, the signed deed in my hand. As the car pulled away, I watched my brother come out onto the porch, looking at the moving pod that had just been delivered. He looked small. He looked like the 34-year-old toddler he had become. I didn't head to the airport, not yet. I had one more stop to make. I drove to a local high-rise in downtown San Diego, the building where I had quietly purchased a small one-bedroom condo 6 months ago. I had never told them about it. I had bought it as a safety net for myself, a place to stay so I'd never have to sleep under their roof again. I walked into my own space, a room that smelled of nothing but fresh paint and possibility. I sat on the floor looking out at the city skyline, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could finally take a deep breath. The Miller family's perfect holiday was over, the lies were exposed, the bank accounts were settled. And as I looked at the sunset over the Pacific, I realized that I hadn't just saved my credit score, I had saved myself. The first few days in my new condo were strangely quiet. In London, my life was a whirlwind of deadlines and commutes, and in my parents' house, it was a constant hum of hidden demands. Here, in the heart of San Diego, there was only the sound of the city below and the thoughts in my head. I didn't reach out to them, and for the first time, they didn't reach out to me. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. By Monday, the reality of my new role as the sole owner of the family home began to set in. I wasn't just a daughter anymore, I was a landlord to people who resented my existence. I spent the morning on a conference call with my attorney and the bank. We finalized the transfer of the deed and set up an escrow account for the property taxes. It was expensive and it was a massive responsibility, but for every dollar I spent, I felt a link in my chain snap. Then the messages started, not from my parents, but from the extended family. My Aunt Sarah sent a long, scathing text about how I was cold-hearted for kicking Jason out. My cousin Mike posted a vague status on Facebook about people who forget where they came from once they get a little bit of money. The narrative was already being written. In their eyes, I wasn't the victim of years of financial abuse. I was the villain who had dismantled a family home right before Christmas. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at my phone, feeling the old familiar urge to defend myself. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to post the bank statements, the screenshots of my mother's manipulative texts, and the receipts for the cruise they tried to steal from me, but I stopped. I realized that defending myself to people who didn't want to hear the truth was just another way of staying trapped in their drama. If they wanted to believe I was the villain, let them. A villain doesn't have to pay for everyone's lunch. A villain doesn't have to answer the phone at 3:00 a.m. I decided to lean into it. I sent a short professional email to Jason, CCing our parents. Jason, the moving pod is half full. You have 48 hours left. I've also been informed that you've been telling the family I'm stealing the house. Just a reminder, I am the sole person on this title now, and I have a record of every cent I've put into this property. If the harassment from the extended family continues, I will move the move-out date to immediate and involve the sheriff. Focus on packing, not Facebook. The response was instant, no more Facebook posts, no more texts from Aunt Sarah. The villain had spoken, and for the first time they were actually afraid of me. It was a dark, hollow kind of power, but it was effective. On Wednesday, I went back to the house to check on the progress. I stayed in the car, watching from the curb. I saw Jason loading the last of his boxes into a beat-up old SUV he'd borrowed from a friend. He looked tired. He looked like he was finally realizing that there was no one left to bail him out. My mother was standing on the porch, clutching a sweater around her, looking lost in a house that no longer belonged to her. I felt a pang of sadness, but it wasn't the kind that made me want to get out of the car. It was the kind of sadness you feel when you watch an old building being demolished. You remember the good times that happened inside, but you know it's too far gone to save. As Jason drove away, he didn't even look toward my car. He just sped off, leaving a trail of exhaust in the driveway. He was gone. The guest wing was empty for the first time in nearly a decade. I walked up to the porch. My mother didn't say anything as I approached. She just opened the door and let me in. The house felt massive now, echoing with the absence of the kids and Jason's constant noise. "He's gone," she said, her voice flat. "He's staying with a friend from high school. They're sleeping on an air mattress." "He's an adult, Mom. He'll figure it out," I said. "Will you?" she asked, finally looking at me. "Will you figure out how to be happy, Claire, or are you just going to be right all the time?" "I'd rather be right and at peace than wrong and drowning with you," I replied. I walked through the house, checking for damage. I found the printed itinerary for the cruise in the trash can in the kitchen. I picked it up, tore it into small pieces, and dropped it back in. The family trip was officially over. Now, the real work of being a family, or what was left of it, had to begin. The following morning, I woke up in my condo to a notification I hadn't expected. It was an email from a local real estate agent. I had reached out to her weeks before I even left London, asking for a market evaluation. She told me that because of the renovations I had funded and the prime location in San Diego, the house was worth significantly more than the remaining debt. "You're sitting on a goldmine, Claire," she had said over the phone. "Even after paying off the bank, you'd walk away with a life-changing amount of equity." I sat there looking at the numbers on my screen. This was the final exit. If I sold the house, I could wash my hands of the mortgage, the repairs, and the legal ties forever. But it would mean moving my parents out sooner than the 6-month grace period I had promised. It would mean truly ending the Miller legacy on that street. I decided to drive over to the house one last time before making my decision. When I pulled up, I saw my father, Gary, sitting on the porch. He wasn't drinking a beer this time. He was just sitting there, staring at the empty driveway where Jason's car used to be. He looked frail, the bravado of the man of the house completely stripped away. I walked up the steps and sat on the railing across from him. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "Inside." "Looking at apartments," he said, not looking at me. "She found a place near the park. It's one bedroom, quiet, probably too quiet for her." "It'll be okay, Dad," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "Why didn't you just tell us, Claire?" He asked, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you just tell us you were hurting? We thought you were a success. We thought you had more than you knew what to do with." "I did tell you," I said, my voice steady but soft. Every time I said I couldn't afford an extra transfer, every time I mentioned I was working 60 hours a week, every time I told you I hadn't taken a day off in 3 years. You just didn't want to hear it because the truth was inconvenient to the lifestyle you wanted. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw shame in his eyes. Not anger, not resentment, but actual raw shame. "I suppose you're right. We saw a provider, not a daughter. I'm still your daughter, Dad, but I'm a daughter who needs to have a future too." I told him then about the plan to sell. I told him that I wouldn't kick them out tomorrow, but that I couldn't keep the house long term. I explained that I would use the proceeds of the sale to set up a modest, locked annuity for them, something that would give them a small monthly supplement to their social security that Jason couldn't touch. "It won't pay for cruises," I said, "but it will make sure you always have groceries and a roof over your head. I'm taking the house, but I'm giving you security. That's the last thing I can do for you." He nodded slowly. "It's more than we deserve after everything." I left the house that afternoon feeling a strange sense of equilibrium. I wasn't the selfish career girl my father had shouted about, but I wasn't the family savior anymore either. I was just a person who had set a very expensive, very painful boundary. On my way back to the condo, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jason. No insults this time, no demands for money, just a photo of Liam and Chloe at a park eating ice cream. "They miss you," the text read. "I'm working at a local warehouse. Starting Monday, double shifts. I'm sorry, Claire, for everything." I didn't reply right away. I pulled over to the side of the road and looked at the photo. The kids looked happy, they looked normal, and Jason was finally working. The villain had done what the savior never could. I had forced him to grow up. I deleted the text, but I kept the photo. That evening, I sat on my balcony in downtown San Diego and watched the city lights flicker to life. The holiday season was still in full swing, but the weight of it was gone. I felt light. I felt clean. I had walked through the fire of my family's greed and come out the other side with my integrity intact. The Miller family was broken, yes. But the pieces were finally on the ground where they belonged, instead of being held up by my aching arms. I picked up my phone and booked a one-way ticket back to London for the first week of January. I was going home. Not to a house of lies, but to a life I had earned. The flight back to London was different from the one that brought me to San Diego. There were no frantic thoughts, no rehearsing of arguments, no hollow hope. As the plane leveled out at 30,000 feet, I felt like I was shedding a skin. I looked out the window at the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was running away. I was moving forward. Returning to my flat in London felt like stepping into a sanctuary. The gray sky and the persistent drizzle of January didn't depress me, they felt honest. I went back to my job, and my colleagues noticed a change immediately. I wasn't the woman who jumped every time her phone buzzed. I wasn't the one staying until 10:00 p.m. every night just to avoid the quiet of her own thoughts. I was present, I was focused. I was finally building a life that wasn't a contingency plan for someone else's failure. Back in California, the house sale moved forward. My realtor was right, it sold in less than a month. The process of packing up my parents' lives was handled by a professional moving company I hired from London. I didn't want to be there for the sorting of memories and the division of furniture. I had already taken the only thing that mattered, my freedom. When the final closing documents were signed digitally, the equity hit my account. It was a staggering amount, the accumulation of 10 years of my life and the appreciation of a San Diego market. I didn't feel like I'd won the lottery. I felt like I'd finally been paid for a decade of unpaid labor. I followed through on my promise. I set up a trust for my parents. It provided a steady, modest monthly payment, enough for a comfortable life in their new senior apartment, but not enough to fund a lifestyle of excess. The terms were ironclad. The money could only be used for housing, utilities, and healthcare. Jason couldn't touch a penny of it. It was my way of being a daughter without being a victim. Jason, surprisingly, stayed at the warehouse. He sent me an email a few weeks after the move. He didn't ask for money. He told me he'd found a 2-bedroom apartment near a good school for the kids. He said it was small, and he was tired all the time, but he liked seeing the look on Liam's face when he paid for a pizza with his own paycheck. He thanked me for the moving pod. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology, and for now, it was enough. As the months passed, the calls from my mother changed. They weren't frantic anymore. She'd tell me about the bridge club at her complex or the flowers she was planting on her small balcony. She'd tell me about Chloe's dance recitals. We didn't talk about the house. We didn't talk about the money. We talked about the things that families are supposed to talk about. The relationship was fragile, like a bone that had been broken and poorly set, but it was healing. I realized that by ruining their Christmas, I had actually given them the only thing that could save them, the truth. As long as I was the bank, they were characters in a play, acting out roles they couldn't afford. Once the stage was gone, they had to become real people again. One evening, I was sitting in a park in London, watching the sunset reflect off the Shard. I pulled out my phone and looked at a photo my mother had sent that morning. It was a picture of her and my father sitting on a bench in their new neighborhood looking at the ocean. They looked older, yes, but they looked settled. I thought about that 3:00 a.m. FaceTime call and the woman who had boarded that plane with a heavy heart. She felt like a stranger to me now. I wasn't that person anymore. I was Claire Miller, and I had learned that the most expensive thing you can ever give someone isn't your money, it's your boundaries. I stood up, adjusted my coat against the London chill, and started walking home. I had a dinner reservation with friends, a project I was excited about, and a bank account that belonged only to me. My family was okay. My brother was growing up, and I was finally irrevocably home.